Well, things on planet Earth are getting curiouser and curiouser. Oh, holy universe, what did I get myself into? So today, I'm speaking to another philosopher, Julian Baggini, and he will explain to me why humans form identities, why they wage wars, and why they abolish abortion rights. And in case you are hungry and would like a snack whilst listening to me sounding very silly before this titan of a human, then tune in to the part where Julian Baggini talks about food and how the world eats. I mean, the world on the planet Earth. I am alien, I don't eat.
On my yet another day on this planet, whilst exploring and conducting my investigation into the glitch, I've now bumped into Julian Baggini, a philosopher and a writer. And I'd like to know a little more about self and identity, two things that he seems to be very knowledgeable of. And I'm, as an alien, need to understand why humans attach themselves so much to self and identity. How come is it that they like that?
Big questions. Where do you want me to start?
Well, tell me who you are as a human and how you got to where you are now.
Well, as a human, I was I came into the world in 1968 as an organism, at least.
Okay.
And then I developed, and my mind developed, and I kind of at some point formed into more or less the person I am now, who's been involved in philosophy really ever since he went to university. But for the last like 20 years has been working as a freelance writer.
Okay, so you like philosophy, so you like to like wisdom, like other philosophers, right?
Well, yeah, but although there's this etymological fallacy, yeah, the fact that the etymology of philosophy is the love of wisdom, we know that. I mean, that's just the etymology. I mean, there are lots of words have courtesy, for example. The etymology of courtesy is to do with how you behave in the royal court. But I mean, that's nothing to do with what courtesy means today. So I think sometimes people exaggerate that. I think that philosophers are primarily interested in thinking things through as thoroughly as they can, often quite fundamental issues, and the kind of issues that you can't just settle by going out and collecting more data. That's what philosophy is left with, the hard stuff that's left with once you sorted all the facts out.
So things like the meaning of life on this planet, because I've been looking for the meaning of life on your planet, and so many different humans have given me their view on meaning of life, but nobody really spoken to me about how and why they identify themselves as who they are. So I'm hoping that you can help me with that. What do you
Okay, all right. Well, I don't know, meaning of life first or identify with who we are. I mean, you say meaning of life on this planet, not a bad way of putting it, really, because
Yeah.
I think, who knows what the meaning of life might be on your planet, for example. I mean, I've got, have you got an answer to that for me?
Yeah, it's a love, peace, and universal harmony. We don't even exist as physical embodiments and entities like you do. We're just this sort of constant stream of consciousness that just
Ah,
communicates and contributes to the universal harmony, which is why we sensed a glitch from far away into the distance, and it was coming from this planet. Therefore, I was sent out here to investigate how can I terminate the glitch.
oh, I see. Yeah, you've escaped. Well, look, we were. The thing is, there are people on this planet who are kind of already sussed out there. Probably people like you. I remember when I was quite young, I read a short story by Ray Bradbury, a science fiction writer,
Okay.
who talked about this race of beings on Mars who basically had, again, escaped their bodies and existed as like pure energy. Interestingly enough, though, for them, the meaning of life wasn't. Well, there was peace and harmony in the life, but that wasn't the meaning of it. Peace and harmony was the ideal condition for life. But the meaning of life was simply life itself. The answer to the question, why live, is life itself. They found meaning in the simple value of existence in and of itself. And of course, that story was told to try and, like all science fiction, to try and shed light on our own planet. But I think that's it. The problem is we've got lots of people who think that the meaning of life is to serve some purpose which was given to us by some divine creator, perhaps some agency outside of ourselves. That's quite interesting because it's almost inherently divisive because people don't agree who that divine entity it is. It means that lots of people think that in order to pursue the meaning of life, they have to pursue it in a way that is somewhat exclusive because people of another religion or no religion are excluded from that.
Yeah, I'm very confused. A few other humans have told me about, for example, Catholicism and the atrocities caused by Catholicism, but how they've been brought up Catholic, etc., etc. But I was going to say it seems to be quite a dominating religion. But how about you tell me a little more about Buddhism and, for example, the Maya illusion? Please explain to me.
Yeah, well, the thing, what we use the term religion is, I mean, there's a whole philosophical question itself. What makes something a religion?
Okay.
And Buddhism is often called a religion. Some people prefer to call it a philosophy. I think it has characteristics of both. And of course, Buddhism isn't one thing. You've got Tibetan Buddhism, you've got Theravada Buddhism, you've got so many different types of Buddhism. And a lot of Buddhism, we have to admit, involves belief in, gods and deities and supernatural forces. There's worship and prayer and all this kind of thing. There's another side to Buddhism, which is kind of more intellectual. And it certainly doesn't believe that salvation or living life in its fullest way requires devotion to any particular entity. It's essentially rooted in a kind of realization that the self, and this is where we're going to relate to this identity question, that there is no abiding entity which is the self. The self is what the Buddhists call a collection of aggregates, which are like thoughts, feelings, sensations. And so they believe that by giving up this idea of the abiding self, you can liberate yourself from, well, then it gets complicated because Buddhism emerged in reaction to what we now call the Hindu religions, which believe in the cycle of rebirth, and Buddhism did take that on. So I think much as Buddhism appeals to a lot of secular-minded Westerners, in its origins, it still has quite a lot of quite, religious creeds.
If humans were to remove all these aggregates to make them up, does that mean that there would be nothing as a self?
Well, yeah, no, but here's a good question for you. Is it nothing or not? Because I wrote a book about personal identity, and I think the biggest sort of like problem we got is that a lot of people sum up the view which I hold, which is similar to the Buddhist view, which is the view held by lots of Western philosophers, and I have to say is the view that really is held by most people who study sort of neuroscience and the mind, the way it works. And the view is essentially this: they're saying there is no singular thing which is the self, right? The
Yeah.
self is not an entity in of its own right. It is a collection of parts. Now, the point is, does that mean there is no self? Because a lot of people just use that phrase to describe the Buddhist view. They call it the no self view. But more strictly speaking, we might call it non-self, simply meaning there's no existence of an abiding permanent entity. But of course, there is still a self. The self is the collection. Let me give you a little simple example. In the classic Buddhist text, they talk about how the King Milinda's being explained this doctrine to him, and someone says, "Look, there's no cart other than the wheel and the axle and the platform, etc., etc." Trying to sort of get over in a very common sense way. What do you think a cart is? What a cart is only the collection of its parts. No one thinks there is this kind of cart which exists separate from them, and a human being is just the same. Does that mean a human being does not exist? Well, no, of course a human being exists, but just remember it's just a collection of parts. Now, this might sound really common sense, and I don't know what your conception of self is in your planet, even if you have one. But it is interesting because you said, you don't exist as bodies, you just exist as thoughts or something. But even then, that surely it'd be surprising if it didn't invite the question, well, but in what does this consciousness subsist? There must be some kind of substance in which it subsists. And then you think, oh, well, that substance is what I am. But it's kind of confusing the sort of medium for the content. So in the same kind of way that what is a piece of music may be stored on a compact disc. I'm old-fashioned for a human being. I still listen to compact discs, right? A little plastic disc which you put into a machine and out of it comes music. Um, the music isn't the compact disc. You couldn't have that music without the compact
Okay.
disc. You could have it in a different form, but
Okay.
you need it to be in some embodied in something. You need to have some material substrate, but the music isn't the disc itself. In the same kind of way, the view of the self that people like myself adopt is that, of course, I need to have a body and I need to have a brain. Without those things, there is no way, at least currently, for this consciousness of mine to continue to exist. But what really defines me as who I am is that kind of the consciousness, all those the experiences.
I see. Okay. Humans like to touch, meaning, experience, memories, and all that. Even though, let's not forget, you're made up of iron, magnesium, a little bit of gold, titanium, carbon, oxygen, all of these elements that make up the
Yeah.
universe anyway. Why is it that you as humans have to touch more meaning and more stuff to it? You're already the universe.
Well, first of all, I think the main mistake isn't to attach meaning to that, actually. I mean, that's very, very meaningful. The main mistake is people have historically thought that the things that whatever it is which makes the self possible is not just elements. It must be some kind of soul, some immaterial spirit which exists independently and has some kind of permanent existence. That's been the biggest mistake. Now, you're saying why attach importance? Well, let me turn it around. I mean, why shouldn't it be important? There are things, and there are the things that things are made of. Now, it seems to me that we appreciate things for how they are made, for the arrangement, and the fact that you can have two things made from exactly the same materials doesn't mean that one should be more or less important to another. To give a silly example, well, not a silly example,
Yeah.
I might attempt to write a symphony. That would be a mistake. I don't have the ability or the training to do it. I could write a symphony which had all the same notes as Beethoven's Ninth, right? But not necessarily in the same order, as some very famous British comedian said. Now, the fact that they're both made up of the same notes obviously doesn't mean they're equal value or just as trivial. It's precisely because the notes are arranged so brilliantly in Beethoven's symphony that it's a great piece of music, whereas my hypothetical symphony would be a disaster. So, sure, everything in the universe is made up of the same elements, but we appreciate the fact that not everything made up of these elements is of equal value and interest and importance. Human beings have an incredible complexity. In particular, that comes from the complexity of our brains. Our brains are remarkably complex, and this has allowed us to evolve its capacities of thought and feeling and sensation, creativity, which I think are unparalleled in the natural universe. And I think quite rightly we appreciate that. And perhaps more importantly, it makes us our consciousness is highly developed. We're aware not only of our environment, but we're kind of aware of our awareness, and that gives us that higher level of understanding. And so we can really kind of appreciate what it means to be alive. We can take delight in the simple fact that we wake up in the morning and see the sunrise, or not even see the sunrise, see the rainfall, whatever it might be. This is marvelous. The fact that at the bottom of that is the same stuff that makes up a rock is miraculous, but it's not a reason to think that the rock is just as significant as a human being.
Okay. Well, you're convincing me. Okay, you convinced me there's a little bit of meaning, extra meaning, and there's a certain attachment. But in some philosophies, attachment causes suffering, as you probably know. But what is it is that you as a human are probably most attached to?
Well, can I? Well, okay, that's a personal question, but perhaps I'll come back to the general question about
Yeah.
attachment because I think that is a very interesting point.
Yeah.
What am I most attached to? I think, like most people, if you think about what you're most attached to, it's other people, some certain other people.
Okay.
This is the thing. We're incredibly social species, and what's quite interesting is that people spend a lot of time, pursuing goals which are often self-centered, about our own creativity, our own achievement, can be around money and success and fame. But at the end of the day, when you ask most people what's of most value to them, it's the answer usually involves certain other people.
Is that
That's which is interesting, and a lot of the time people tragically don't even realize that properly until they spend too much time pursuing other things. But if I can just go back to the general question of attachment, because I think that is right, because you're a bit skeptical coming from your wherever you come from, where it seems that people have achieved this wonderful equanimity and sort of like non-attachment to ego and all this kind of stuff. It might sound wonderful, but then I wonder if you haven't got any of that kind of stuff, what you're even doing here, why you're interested. But anyway, attachment as an issue. So what we mean here is that we can appreciate that life is a wonderful thing, a beautiful thing. We can wish to be alive. We can delight in being alive. But as you say, particularly Buddhism is associated with this view. When we become too attached to that, it does create suffering because the point is because we're made of stuff and there's no abiding essence, it means that we're constantly in flux and we're not immortal. We will not live forever. We will come to an end. So I think that the if there's no secret, as it were, because it's all out there, but the trick of really living in the right spirit is to be able to embrace and enjoy and appreciate. That means treating other people well, etc. All with a fundamental acceptance of the fact that nothing is forever, that you can't get too attached to things. But I think the point is that the answer isn't complete detachment because attachment is what gives things value. Like I say, what most people most appreciate is other people. And so I'm very taken by, I don't know where you traveled in on our planet. Have you been to Japan yet?
no, not yet.
Well, have a go. Have a go. Go to Japan, or speak to someone who's kind of really steeped in Japanese philosophical thought. Because it seems that in Japan there's quite a dominant tradition of this kind of appreciation of the transience of all things, and that this brings with it a combination of the bitter and the sweet, right? So in Japan, the time to go to Japan, because you need to book now, is for what they call Golden Week, which is going to be sometime next early spring. And it's the cherry blossom season. This is the most important holiday. It's like Christmas in Japan is a cherry blossom season, the Hanami festival. And what happens is that people will, as a cherry blossom comes out, people will picnic and drink under the trees together. That's what they do.
Yeah.
Why? What's so great about that? Well, the cherry blossom is of great symbolic importance because it bursts into beauty almost out of nowhere. It's like you wake up one day and everywhere's this beautiful cherry blossom. With the first strong wind, it's gone, it's fallen, right? So this is a kind of symbol of the fact that, all the beauty in life is not destined to last. And so the sort of attitude of mind you have towards that is of appreciation and enjoyment, but it does have with it a certain kind of sadness too. Something is sad about it not lasting. So this capacity to grasp and hold at the same time the joy and the sadness of life in one, I think is the most important thing to do. Because I think some traditions try and tell us that no, don't have to have any of the sadness because if you have no attachment at all, you're not worried that the cherry blossom is going to drop or that people will die. You're not attached to anything. But if you have no attachment at all, you don't get the joy either. So there's a kind of a deal. If you're
Okay.
going to have the joy, you have to take the sadness. Otherwise, you kind of have to neuter yourself, make yourself kind of what's the word?
Uh,
Numb. You have to
somehow.
numb yourself against things, yeah. And you don't want to be numb.
No, I don't think you humans can be now, but I see your point. So this the Sakura cherry blossom is a metaphor for the entire meaning
Yeah. Are
existence.
you is your species numb? Because you've got this great equanimity, you don't care about ego. Does that
Sounds
mean you're numb? Does that
uh
mean you don't take joy or delight or you don't have pain, but you don't have happiness either?
no, it's the joy is joy. The
It's
light is
all joy.
yes.
All joy. Okay, fair enough.
We just have to hold the universe in balance and an equilibrium. But anyway, enough about me as an entity. Yes, but I see what you mean with the cherry blossom festival. So it's a metaphor for your very short lifespan on this planet. So on average, you have like 70, 80 rotations around your sun. and then poof, you go back into the ground, and you.
Yeah, although interestingly enough, you say poof, right? This is the mistake humans make. I'm surprised to hear a non-human make the same mistake because the mistake people have is they think that this is what happens. You burst into the world at birth, bang, fully formed. I'm me. You live for however long it is, 80 years if you're lucky, and then bang, you're gone. But the point is, because there is no fixed self, because we're just this collection, what happens is that actually this thing is evolving. And there's a sense in which, if I think of me now, for example, my connection to me when I was 6 weeks old is almost nothing. I have no memory of that. And I'm totally unlike whatever that creature was like. Probably complete pain in the neck, just simply crying and asking for food and shitting everywhere, you know? I still do some of that, but hopefully not so often. Now, if I think about myself 20 years ago, there's a stronger connection to that person. But again, I'm not exactly the same person and I've moved on. So what happens is that we're at any one moment, the you that you were is, as it were, going out of being very slowly, and you're going into being of the thing that you are. So you doesn't have this kind of highly bounded beginning and an end. It's kind of this process. It's a process. At some point, that process comes to an end. That's true. But it's not kind of it's not the end of the same thing that started out. It's all been changing.
Okay, so you're in a constant state of flux, and in a way, you are your own illusion of something that was, never will be again, but will be something else due to the constant accumulation of new memories and experiences and interactions with other humans.
Illusion, why do you say the word illusion?
What if there was a human who assumed that they're going to be in 20 years' time what they were 20 years ago?
Yeah, that would be a mistake. That'd be a kind of an illusion. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I feel like there are humans here that are thinking that they would be the same thing they were, say, 20 years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
Are they in
Okay.
the wrong then?
I think that's true. I think a lot of people have a mistaken idea of the kind of thing they are and don't
Yeah.
appreciate the extent. And so in that sense, there is an illusion. Um, Illusion's an interesting word. I mean, when I wrote the book, I talked to people about this, and because I didn't like the word illusion because it sounded, when people say self is an illusion, they reach a conclusion the self doesn't exist in any sense at all. Whereas really all we mean is the self does not exist as a permanent, unchanging entity. It does exist. It's just this, it exists as a process. So one of the phrases I used in that book, which is called the ego trick, by the way, I must get the advert in, is that I is a verb disguised as a noun. And what I mean is that I am the totality of the things that I experience and do, right? Which are really actions and activities. I'm not so much a thing. I need a thing, a physical body in order to exist, but I'm not really identical with that thing. So, but on the other hand, you might say illusion's not a bad word because what does illusion mean? So, Susan Blackmore, the psychologist, she likes the term illusion because she says an illusion is anything which isn't as it seems. And she says the self isn't as it seems because non-reflectively, when we don't think about it, the self does appear to be this singular entity which carries on through life. Now, from that point of view, I'm fine. So, if you want to use the term illusion, I kind of understand, but I think we need to be very careful to say that the fact that the self isn't exactly what it seems to be doesn't mean it doesn't exist at all.
Okay, I agree. Yeah.
I'm glad you agree. I've got extraterrestrial endorsement.
Yeah,
This
you
is
convinced me.
fantastic.
Oh no, yeah, you convinced me. Okay, I'm seeing a parallel between where I'm from and you humans. So if you all collectively contributing to each other's process as humans, and if
Hmm.
you can't exist just in your singular form.
Yeah.
Can you answer this very big question I've got? How come is it that some humans are not nice to other humans? I'm seeing a lot
Ah.
of I'm seeing a lot of tragic events happening here recently.
Oh,
Is it-
look, it is dreadful. It is difficult not to be depressed. I can be a bit of a misanthrope, as we say. Don't know if you come across that word, you look at how human beings treat each other, and there's a lot of absolutely appalling things going on. And it's not just elsewhere. I mean, people tend to think about the appalling things that are going on where there are major wars and all that kind of stuff. But actually, even in our own country, Britain hasn't, well, it has been involved in wars overseas, of course, which have been quite deadly.
Yes.
It hasn't been internal wars for years, but every week there's violence in homes. There's violence against, particularly against women and girls. Unfortunately, I mean they are the main victims of violence, and terrible things. So why? Well, look, this is slightly the philosophical question. The why answer to that is for all our incredible complexity, we are still essentially animals in the sense that, that's the operating system. That's the hardware on which our operating
Yeah,
systems
I
is
got it.
operating, and the hardware of the mammal, the Homus mammal, has got a lot of things, a lot of systems built into it, which sort of emphasize things like some competition and violence for defense, um, and also the social, actually the social aspect of human beings works for and against us as well, because we have this social instinct, but the social instinct which makes us cooperate together in our own groups also makes us operate with hostility to other groups, unfortunately, again. So you need to go and talk really to biologists and anthropologists and historians about why human beings are so nasty in that way. Now, to approach the question from another level, though, I mean, when you started the question, you were talking about how you can't really exist in isolation. And I think that's a very interesting point, which isn't properly appreciated. I mean, there is a sense in which you could, in the sense that if you was to drop me onto a desert island with no other people and there was resources, I could keep myself alive and I could survive until I died. I could do that. It's technically possible, but that is not the normal condition of a human being. Uh, Aristotle said the human being is a social animal 2 millennia ago, and most people agree. But I think the more important thing is this. Okay, so I think that I'm talking to you in from the United Kingdom, which is, global historical political terms, classified as a Western nation, of a product of the modern West.
Mhm.
And the West has been shaped by the Enlightenment. I've got lots of very good things to say about the Enlightenment. Probably a lot of people will tell you bad things about it. I'm more of a defender than a detractor. But one of the things that's happened in this sort of modernity is that we've had this great emphasis on individualism. And this was seen as a positive thing, largely because of our religious history, actually. People had to be freed from the tyranny of submission to ecclesiastical and religious authorities, think for themselves, etc., etc. And that, good, all that is very good. But it's kind of almost gone a bit overboard to the extent that people sort of prize their own individual rights and autonomy and choices above all else. And they've forgotten something really important, which I don't think they've forgotten in other parts of the world. So again, if you go back to Japan, well,
Mhm.
not go back, if you go to Japan, which you must do, you'll find like many non-Western cultures, there the idea that the individual is inherently embedded in social relations and is who they are because of those is much, much more like common sense. And it affects even things like behavior in public transport. In public transport in London, I don't know if you've gone around London, have you taken public transport in London? Because if you do, you'll find there are lots of nice people there, sure. But generally speaking, when people get onto the trains and everything, people are trying to claim their own space. That's what they do. And once they've claimed their own space, they don't often care too much about other people. So one thing that happens all the time in public transport in London, I try to avoid it, is you have to listen to other people's music, or rather, you don't have to listen to other people's music. You have to listen to the horrible little beats coming out of their headphones because they don't care. And increasingly now, people will play videos on their phone through the speaker. I don't care, like who, and I have to listen to it. They don't care, right? You go to Japan on the Tokyo subway, and you don't find that. You find that although everyone's crammed in, they respect each other's space because they have more of that. There's still that sense that you have to think about your relations to other people. I don't want to romanticize it, okay, but there is definitely a difference of emphasis. So I think the point is this, that it is true that we are who we are largely because of our social relations. We are neighbors, sons, daughters, brothers, sisters, colleagues, whatever it might be. And the totality of those relations is necessary to explain who we are. Unfortunately, I think our individualism makes us think that that's all secondary. And what I primarily is I am. I am who I am, as a famous song said.
Okay. Uh, so you're telling me that places like Japan, their society, their social, their social fabric is woven within how they collectively treat themselves.
There, I
But
think there's yeah, I believe this is true. I mean, I've spoken to people from these cultures and everything, so I'm not, I've tried to check this one out.
okay,
But generally speaking, there is more of this sense of how your own existence is part of a network of other people's, and you have those responsibilities and connections, and you don't kind of forget them. I mean, I've heard some stories of some like students from China, for example, who have come to study in the UK, who just find the way in which people live in their student accommodation very strange because they find it very kind of self-centered. Um, Also, just things around family as well. Family is changing a lot in this country like China, obviously, because of the one child, now the two child policy, etc., etc. But I think it's still true that most Chinese people still feel a kind of responsibility to their parents, which is stronger than it is in here. Now, listen, one thing I should advise you about here, I'm making these cross-cultural comparisons, and when you hear some people talking about them and you hear me talking about them, it might sound as though like human beings are kind of like very different in wherever they are in the world. That's kind of like, like the Japanese are different to the British, etc. Now, it's important for me to say that I'm only talking about sort of average differences, and there are also differences of emphasis. I think human beings are basically the same all over the world, but what is given priority varies. So in a country like ours, people, of course, they're aware of and place some importance on their social relations, but increasingly they put more emphasis on their own rights and projects as individuals. Similarly, it's not as though people have no interest in their own selves and individual projects and rights in places like China or Japan, but there is a greater awareness compared to the West of the social relations. So what you're looking at around the world is different emphases. That's all it is. We're not talking about humanity being split into these kind of binary opposites of like collectivist Orientals and
yeah.
individualist Westerners. That's a kind of a caricature.
No, no, I agree, I agree. But the collectivist Orientals very closely resembles the mentality we got on our end of the universe.
Well, yeah, but the thing is, if you look at it, yeah, you say that, but I think the differences in those two ways of thinking doesn't really map on necessarily very neatly to the degree of violence and cruelty, right?
Hmm.
So what you'll find is that in places like Japan and China in recent history, there's been some quite barbaric stuff done in the name of the collective, because the danger there is that when the collective is held to be very important, sometimes it means that individuals don't really count for anything. So, Chairman Mao in China saw the Chinese national destiny was much more important than lives of individual Chinese people. So he didn't really care if millions died. And similarly, Japan during its imperialist era was very, very indifferent to the lives of individuals. It was actually quite glorious to die for the country. And also this thing about inside or outside groups. They were the collectivist group in Japan was good, but there's a lot of cruelty to non-Japanese. So I'm not sure you're right to say that this mentality is closer to the one on your planet because that mentality also has its violent side. I
Yeah,
think
I meant
the violence comes from the basic hardware of the human being. It seems to be, it just manifests itself in different ways depending on whether it's running on a more collectivist or individualist software, to use that metaphor. We
uh,
like metaphors. Do you like metaphors on your planet?
yeah, we like metaphors. I meant when I said I meant without the violence, but I forgot that humans sometimes are violent, which is it's a extra driver. We don't have that driver
Oh,
instead
okay. Good for you.
violence. So okay then, how would you in your field be able to maybe help educate humans to be maybe less violent or a little more conscious of themselves? Or
Yeah,
because you have a very
I,
particular audience, I think. But
I'm reluctant to kind of make any claim. I think that there's this expression, this sort of the sort of division of labor, and there's an intellectual division of labor. I think that the people who are best equipped to reduce, well, look, let me go back completely differently. Actually, what we probably know is that the best ways to reduce violence in human beings is actually to address the material conditions which give rise to violence.
okay,
So most violent crime is committed by young men
okay.
who come from what we call deprived areas, who see little opportunity, and for whom crime is a way of gaining status and perhaps money. If they had other opportunities, they wouldn't do it so much. Simple as that. Um, Wars tend to emerge when there's feelings of insecurity, which can be exploited by leaders, etc., etc. So, if you want to make humanity more peaceful, I think actually working on the material conditions is probably better. Actually, getting people as individuals to have a more kind and altruistic outlook. Sure, that's something that we should try to do. Our education systems and our society should do that.
Mhm.
But that's kind of hard work. I do think one thing that's very important though is as it were modeling and example setting. And one of the worries I have about what we call the West with a capital W is that our politics were supposed to model peaceful coexistence and compromise. That's what democracy was all about. With democracy, we don't rule with the gun or the knife, and nor does the winner dominate the loser. The winner governs for all. We make the decision in an election, but then the winner vows to govern for everybody. Even Donald Trump, when he won the presidency the first time, in his speech said he was going to govern for all Americans, not only those who voted for him.
Okay.
Even he felt the need to say that. I doubt that was true. Increasingly, our politics is modeling something much nastier. There's much more nationalism. There's much more of a sense of trying to divide the population up against themselves, in particular, against forces they see to be bad, such as liberal elites or immigrants or whatever it might be. And I think that when you have the politics kind of modeling this overly aggressive and confrontational and also winner takes all kind of mentality, I think that has a bad effect, unfortunately. So that's not very good. So we could do with having kinder politics, and we do still have. I mean, we're quite lucky in the sense we still get the odd person winning an election who does stand up for those things. We just need more of them to do it.
It's just one person winning an election against a bigger group of humans that need to help out this individual, no?
Well, it's not just one person, because of course the person represents a party and they stand for other things. They
Okay,
don't
yeah.
they don't do it by themselves. But yeah, but it's interesting. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, I think it does make a difference. A lot of people are very cynical. They think that it doesn't matter who the government is. They are all the same. But it certainly makes a difference to the mood and the tone of things. Um,
It sounds
but
like those, yeah, it sounds like those cynical humans maybe have lost faith.
well, yeah. I mean, like I say, I can understand that. Sometimes I feel like losing faith myself, but we
Okay.
are a very strange species. I'm sure you've noticed this. I mean, you've noticed how humans do cruel, horrible things to each other, but then you also notice how they do a heck of a lot of really good things for each other. They don't have to do. There is a lot of kindness and there is a lot of altruism in the world as well. And how can it be that we're capable of both? And sometimes the same people are capable of both. You know,
Yeah, that's what's confusing me, but I can see it.
I'd go back to the hardware, as it were. But our best hope is to try to create the kind of social environment which encourages more the good side and discourages more the bad side.
Okay.
Um,
Um, just a very weird question, and tell me if it's weird and stupid. But like I said, I mean, I'm only an alien here. You know all these religions that you humans have.
Yeah.
So many types of religions, and they all have their different sets of beliefs and one main deity that seems to be invisible and all that. If imagine, just imagine, none of those religions ever existed or ever formed, would you see the world differently? Or how would it be different?
It's an interesting question. It's hard to know how sensible it is. It's not a stupid question, but you are given that religion has been something which has emerged in human societies so often. To imagine a human history without it ever emerging is really to imagine that humans were different from the start. I think that's the real problem.
Okay.
Um, so I don't really know. I think the short answer would be, I mean, there's a temptation, and some people are. I mean, I am an atheist. I have no religion.
Okay.
There's a tendency for people like myself to say, "Oh, the world would be so much a better place if it didn't have any religion in it." But
Okay.
then there are other ways. I mean, the point is that it's not necessarily the religion is almost the irrelevant point. What's all the bad things that have been done in the name of religion have largely been about groups and powerful people and fights for power, and you get the secular versions of that. So, the Cultural Revolution in China was nothing to do with religion. Stalin's sort of purges and all the pogroms there were nothing to do with religion. So I think that even if you could have a counterfactual history where religion didn't play a role, you still got human beings with their often fractional group allegiance and powerful people looking to exploit power, etc. And it would have all the bad things probably would have come out in other ways. And also, I don't know whether or not it's an open question whether or not it could even have been worse because, at their best, religions, at least officially, promote virtues around, peace, love, and humility. I, I
Um,
don't think it would have been
yeah,
better with that because I think that we have perfectly good non-religious ways of promoting those values. But
yeah, no, yeah, I asked because the I kind of noticed a little caveat. For example, religion seems to be dictating the bodily rights over your female humans and whether
yeah,
they can or not terminate their pregnancy.
yeah,
Well, that's why I was wondering. I mean, religion seems to be preaching love, peace, and harmony, but when a female human doesn't have rights to keep a baby or not, how does that how can we justify that religion?
yeah. Well, listen, I mean, of course, I agree that female humans should have that right. Absolutely, of course they should. The problem is from the point of view of those strong religious forces in Poland. Um, the problem there is that they also think they are in the name of love of the unborn child, right? So that's the point. They think the unborn child, as they would call it, no matter how undeveloped it is, because let's be honest, in the early stages of a pregnancy, you can't really call that a child.
Yeah,
It's something that's still turning into a child.
yeah,
They see that as having as much right to love and care as the female human. So I think there's a kind of a misguided view of what is the proper object of respect and veneration. But in their minds, it's about love for humanity. That's exactly it. Interesting enough, I was in Eastern Europe recently. It's funny how, I flew into Poland and went to Czech Republic. Poland's one of the most sort of religious countries in Europe, and Czech Republic is actually one of the most atheists, and they share a border. Yeah. I don't know exactly how it happened that two countries so close could have such a difference. But even there, the Czech Republic, people having these posters up about the genocide. They called it the genocide of unborn children. So they think they're on the side of love. And that's the real thing about it. If you want to understand human cruelty, you have to ask yourself, what is it? What is the thing that these people think is actually really good? Because there are some psychopaths who just love being nasty and they love pain. But most terrible suffering is caused by people who believe they're pursuing the most noble objective possible. So you need to understand what that is to understand why they're doing the bad things.
You humans are already complicated. Your operating system is all over the place.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Well, but come on, we're working on pretty primitive hardware. This is the point, I mean, we're trying to update the software all the time. So every time I write a book, I'm trying to basically sort of, give a little software plugin to help things work better. But the hardware is pretty primitive.
Okay. So what's the latest software updates in your ego trick book?
Oh, okay. Well, the last one to come out was called How to Think Like a Philosopher, which would be nice if more people did that, I think, but who knows. But soon I've got a book coming out called How the World Eats, which is all about food systems, actually, which might not sound very
Oh,
philosophical,
is it
but there
about
is philosophy there.
Zoe? Is it about that Zoe nutrition app thing?
Oh, well, no, there's a tiny bit on Zoe in there. Actually, I wrote a longer article about that. Yeah. Now that's just a very, very small part of it, I have to say. But
Okay.
yes, yeah. So it's all about food systems and what makes food systems food systems are incredibly complex. Say human beings are complicated. Our food systems are incredibly complicated. And people are always reaching for simplistic answers there as well. That's one thing we like to do. We like the simple answers because complexity is too much for our pathetic little monkey minds. But it's trying to kind of help people to grapple with a lot of the complexity around our food systems, which includes our own health, but also includes all sorts of other things.
Wait. So why is this food system so complicated?
Why is it so complicated? Well, we've got a planet of how many billion people? I lose count. Someone's counting.
Probably seven, I think.
We have to grow enough food for it.
I see.
We have to ship that food. We have to process it sometimes. It has to be cooked. Has to be stored. That involves using land and how do you use land in ways which are responsible because that's complicated. That's not straightforward. So, for example, the easy complication is that a lot of people think it's a simple battle between horrible, intensive industrial agriculture and beautiful, lovely organic agriculture. But actually, if everyone was growing things in a very low intensity way, we'd need so much land to grow our food on, we'd be in trouble. You've got to think about the best ways to control it, to ship it. What about all the issues around animal welfare? What about the issues around health? What about all the people working in the food chain? I mean, one of the things I say in the book there is that we hear about exploitation in the food system. There's a lot of it. And my argument is that it's a feature, not a bug. In other words, our current food system depends upon the fact that there are millions of people working virtually as slaves to produce it. And that to change that would require, in a sense, quite a major overhaul of the system,
Oh,
which
wow.
we should do it, but it's fundamental.
So you telling me that if I, in this human form, go into a shop to enjoy a nice apple, somebody has I give money for this apple, I pay for somebody to be exploited to pick the apple and suffer.
Well, not necessarily. It might be the apple you pick has been produced without that. But what I'm saying is, if you were to just go around that supermarket and put into your basket the typical things that people put into their basket, you will find exploitation in all sorts of products, and sometimes some surprising ones. So, for example, you might put a tin of tomatoes
Okay.
a tin of Italian tomatoes into your basket. Well, there's a major report a few years back about how there is a lot of the use of basically undocumented immigrant labor in picking tomatoes in Italy, often under the control of organized crime, because organized crime does everything there. Terrible conditions there, and that's Italian tomatoes, right? People are much more aware of issues around things like cocoa and coffee, but fish, seafood. Again, there are people living as virtual slaves. I mean, there are actually people working on boats in the seas off the United Kingdom who are living in conditions that are pretty much of slaves. There's this interesting sort of legal loophole whereby you can employ people from other parts of the world in your fishing boat as long as they don't step on land for more than about 2 hours. a month or something, and they're living in these awful conditions, and they're often treated very badly. So yeah, it's not that literally every product, but there is the
Oh,
system as a whole.
I get it.
As,
I was
yeah.
trying to understand the system by giving an example, and I didn't think it was that mean. So you're telling me the humans are still maybe unknowingly contributing to that. I don't think
Yeah.
any human will be happy when they read your. Well, I mean, they'll be happy to read the book. They'll
Well,
be happy when they read the book, but they might not be happy when they find out.
well, yeah, no, but
It's,
people, I mean, I think people are aware there is some. I don't think people recognize how much. I think one problem though is people aren't happy because they feel that it's it can't be their responsibility to deal with all of this. It's too much. They don't want to have to think about it every time they go into a shop. And actually, I'm a little bit sympathetic to that. I think if you know,
okay.
then you make choices accordingly. But I agree, it's not your responsibility to research every product. The responsibility should be pushed back to suppliers, supermarkets, and government legislation eventually. And the good news is it isn't impossible actually. If you it is impossible. I think it's pretty much impossible for a Western consumer to ensure there is literally no exploitation of animals, humans, or the environment in anything they buy. That is unrealistic. But then it's hubris to think that as an individual you could avoid that. You're part of a system. We're going back to this idea of the self,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's it.
And I think sometimes there's this ethical consumerism idea is just actually a celebration of the individualism in another form. It's saying I as an individual can like if not save the world, can behave in a way which I can isolate myself from all the bad things going on. No, you can't. We're part of the social fabric. So it's multi-levered. As individuals, we do what we can, but
Yeah,
then we have to kind of like push others to do what they can. And there's an element of trust by depending on where you buy things or who you buy from, there are different kind of levels of trust. So there are certain brands and labels which will tell you there's a higher chance of it being fair to farmers and everything. And there are
mhm,
some shops which have better standards than others, frankly. Unfortunately, they tend to be the more expensive ones, so not everyone can afford it, right? But
mhm.
if you're a sort
Hold
of
on.
middle to upper income member of the public, you can choose to buy things and be more confident
So that
about
means that
sourcing.
okay, so that means that the lower class
Yeah.
don't really have that choice. That
They
the
don't have as they don't have as much, they really don't have as much choice. I think this is a realistic truth to say. Ideally, we should be buying things which are environmentally sustainable, which are kind to animals if you're having animal products, and also not involving any kind of exploitation. But we live in an economic system whereby there are some people who can barely afford to eat. And sure, it's not impossible technically for them to adjust their choices and to make better choices than others, but it is unreasonable to expect them to put their resources in. That's not their responsibility. It's not their fault, right? You
okay,
need there should be a system which makes it possible for everyone to eat well in
yeah.
every sense of the word. Everyone should be able to eat well. And if some people can't afford to, you can't blame that person because you're saying, look, you got the cheap tin of tomatoes, which is probably more likely to have the exploitation in it than the premium brand. Of course, you can't point the finger like that. No.
Do you think the system is kind of rooted in fear of the whole truth? So, for example, the tin of tomatoes on the cheap one, if it said instead of juicy sweet tomatoes, if it said on the label tomatoes produced by exploitation of humans, don't you think that's the better way of marketing it? Like,
Yeah. Well, no, I agree. There is. I mean, no one would have that, right? Because the point is, the problem with the exploitation is often the exploitation is sort of hidden and it's not official. The point I think is true is there should be more honest labeling. So, for example, I can go into a supermarket. I'll use a supermarket example, and
okay,
I can pay more if you eat meat, you can pay more for the stuff which says free range or organic or RSPCA freedom food, right?
okay,
But there should be labels on the other stuff saying, um, steaks from cows that live in sheds every
okay,
day of the year, right?
right,
Um, uh, bacon from pigs that spend all their time in a crate this size. I think, there should be transparent. There should be transparency, and if there were transparency, I think a lot of people would make different choices, even if they had limited income. Because frankly, I know what I would do if I had a very limited income. Unfortunately, I'm not a vegan, but I'd probably end up being close to vegan because I only eat animal products where I'm confident about the welfare standards, and at the moment that's generally quite expensive. So, I might be having a little bit of organic yogurt and a little bit of artisan cheese, and other than that, I'm going to be living on chickpeas and lentils and everything. So, I hope people buy my book because otherwise I'm going to have one of those a miserable vegan existence. I know a vegan existence isn't necessarily miserable, but this sort of low income one would be.
No, I think yeah, I was hoping that you as a human were contributing to the betterment of society, and I can see you are doing that through this book. Um, and how about your other book, the ego trick or is it ego trip? Because they sound
Ego
like
trick, yes, ego trick, because it's a little play on words. So the
yeah, it
ego
is a
trick.
play.
The
Okay,
ego trick's been out for a while, but it's been interesting. I mean, I really um you love all your books like you love your children, apparently. I don't have children, so I don't know if that's true. But I'm quite fond of that one because it was the subject matter of my PhD, but my PhD was a very narrow thing. PhDs are very,
yeah.
very
What
narrow, very
what was
specific.
your PhD topic then?
But it was personal identity, but I was
Oh,
looking
okay.
very much at the ideas of one particular philosopher called Derek Parfit, and
Oh,
it's a very, very specific thing. The book went a lot broader, and yeah, no, I still think there were lots of books with similar titles which deal with similar areas, and the point is, you see, that as a writer, I'm not generally making claims for my own originality. My job is to uh, really bring different ideas together, explain them clearly, and to show their relevance. Those are the three things I'm trying to do. And I feel quite confident that in that book I did that for the issue of the self quite well. Other books I think are sometimes trying to push a particular line a bit more, or they're coming from a more particular angle, be it neuroscience, psychology, or whatever it might be. I think this one sort of like brings things together. I hope.
okay. What's one thing that could change humans' mindset after reading the ego trick book?
Well, I think it depends on what you believed when you before you came in.
Okay, okay.
Because some people might come in more or less with the right opinion.
Uh-huh.
I think actually you do. I think if you have the illusion that the self is this abiding entity, essentially separated from others, you come to appreciate it as this slightly more amorphous thing, more interdependent with others, more connected. At the
Okay.
same time, if you come in with the view that you think the Buddhist view of not self, and you think it's all an illusion, I think hopefully it might make you have a slightly more nuanced interpretation in which you say, yeah, in fact, it even looks like the Buddha talked about the self. The Buddha
Yeah.
didn't actually stop talking about the self. So it is legitimate to talk about the self. We just got to be careful what we mean from it. It's not going to save the world, though, my book. I hate to say that.
What
I
do you
wish
think
it did.
and okay, as a philosopher, one last alien question. As a philosopher, what do you think can save this planet? Or it could be
Ooh,
just
well, I mean,
like,
I think that for all our flaws and all that kind of stuff, I think at the end of the day, human beings have certain instincts for survival and for cooperation, and we're not totally stupid. And I think that a combination of sort of ingenuity and sort of like collective self-interest could well just see us through. I think the greatest threat to our existence is some kind of terrible, it's probably more from some terrible accident than from design, to be honest. I think the risk is that we develop things which we could set off by mistake with catastrophic consequences. I think the chance that says someone doing it deliberately, I think there could be an awful, awful event uh, triggered deliberately, but the extermination of the human race, In fact, I think in some ways, I think that's a red herring. People are too worried about the extermination of the human race. No, we don't have to worry about that. We have to worry about the scenario where half of us get wiped out or 90% get wiped out. That's horrific enough, right?
But yeah, I think you've experienced it in a few iterations already.
We have, but not
Yeah.
for a very, very, very long time.
Okay. But would you say maybe a better balance between male humans and female humans?
That's
No?
part of it, absolutely. Interesting enough, do you know what I heard today? I ask readers to fact check this for themselves. Don't believe anything I tell them.
Okay.
That this Olympics will be the first Olympics in history where there is as many female competitors as male. And
Okay.
I was actually really surprised by that because I shouldn't be surprised. I know that, there's a long way to go for female equality. But I thought in something like the Olympics, where the numbers are really obvious, I would have assumed that for a long time now, there has been equal male-female participation, but apparently not. This is going to be the first time. So, there's a heck of a long way to go. So absolutely, yes, yes. I totally agree with that. It's been one of our huge problems is that we've done that. And you don't have to believe that women are any better than men on average. The point is you're not making proper use of half your population if you don't give that half the same opportunities as the others,
Yeah, see, that was my point. Yeah. I think you're all equally capable, just in different forms.
Yeah, is that why you've chosen to manifest yourself in this world in female form?
Uh,
You're a female presenting alien.
the female human host, she's got a brain kind of illness, but which basically makes her brain frequency sort of sync with my frequencies. So she's got very high alpha and delta frequencies, which are the frequencies
Oh, I see. I
we kind of communicated from our part of the universe. So the frequencies match. So I could just sync with this human host. Nothing special. She just happens to be a female human.
Okay,
Yeah.
brilliant.
But thank you so much, Julian Baggini, for this wonderful talk. It's been very enlightening.
Thank you. Well, I hope we get to hear. I mean, you need to do a series. You need to shed light from the wisdom of your planet for us. We need a bit of extraterrestrial assistance, I think.
I agree, but I probably should venture out on my next step of my investigation and probably find an anthropologist, just as you suggested.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I guess I shall continue on my quest for answers on this planet. Thank you so much.
Hello, where was I? Oh, yes. Oh, my universe, my moon and stars. As an alien, I understand that as an individual, or as an entity, in my case, I do as much as I can, but there is also collective responsibility. Well, you think that would have been the case all along, right? Just like in the rest of the universe. So we are part of this so-called social fabric, and that seems to be woven mostly by trust, as Julian Baggini just explained to me. So join me on my quest to examine trust next time when I look into sex, gender, and the trust, or lack of it, thereof.
Live at home.